Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Optometry Money Podcast, where we're helping ODs all over the country make better and better decisions around their money, their careers, and their practices. Thank you so much for listening once again, and for new listeners, thank you so much for joining. I'm your host, Evon Mendrin, certified financial planner and owner of Optometry Wealth Advisors, a financial planning firm just for optometrists nationwide. And on today's episode, I am joined by Ben Collier, founder and CEO of Independent Optical Lab. Ben and I talk all about the challenges private practices are facing today, from consolidation to keeping control over profitability in the practice. We talk about how to address those challenges and the difference that working with an independent optical lab can make in your practice and patient experience. And if you have any questions on this episode or thoughts about future topics, send me an email at Evon, EVON, at optometrywealth.com. If you've enjoyed the conversation, please share with your peers and leave us a review. You can check out the show notes to this episode in the Education Hub on my website, www.optometrywealth.com, as well as all other episodes and articles we've created. And while you're there, you can schedule a no-commitment introductory call to talk with me about what's on your mind financially and learn how we help ODs all over the country proactively plan around taxes, student loans, investing, and more. Without further ado, here is my conversation with Ben Collier. And welcome back to the Optometry Money Podcast. I'm your host, Evon Mendrin, and I'm here with yet another awesome guest. Would love to welcome to the show Ben Collier, founder and CEO of Independent Optical Lab. Ben, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks, Evon. Good to be on your show. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And I'm excited to chat with you about your experience in starting and growing an independent optical lab and some of the challenges and opportunities that you see in private practices. And frankly, because a lot of this is outside of my direct wheelhouse as a financial advisor, and it's just going to be interesting for me to learn. But I think there's a lot that the listener can take away as a private practice owner from some of the things you'll share with us. But before we get into all of that, give us a little bit of a background for yourself. How did you get into working in and around eye care, and what led to Independent Optical Lab?
Sure. Thanks. So it's been an interesting road here. I have been in the business a whole lot less time than a lot of the people who work here at the lab, and probably than a whole lot of your listeners. So I used to be similar field as you. I was heading into financial planning, working on my CFP designation, investment licenses, and just ended up taking a hard left turn into optical in 2009. So for me, it's really only been 13 years of a journey and 2 years here with Independent Optical Lab. But sort of the Cliff Notes version of my background is I was in banking with JP Morgan in upstate New York, Syracuse area, where I grew up, and was working, as I said, on financial advising path. I wanted to get out of the banking scene and into private financial advising. So I'd been working towards that, but really was not connecting well with the corporate scene in the banking world. Now, I wasn't planning on sticking with the corporate scene, but I got so sick of it at the time that I ended up taking a detour. So I had some customers at the bank that I was working at who owned Optogenics and US Optical, the Cotran brothers, three brothers up there. They've been pretty well known in the field, and they've started and sold two very, very successful optical laboratories. So I knew those guys from my time at the bank, had worked with them for a number of years, and had gotten to know them a little bit outside the bank, but mostly at the bank. And got a call from one of the brothers one day who knew he could probably tell I was miserable in the corporate world. And normally I would not be too open with a customer, but he asked me on the phone one day, said, "Hey, are you happy where you work?" And he'd tried recruiting me to come work at the lab a couple times. And, I was on a career path. I had my investment license, working on my CFP. I just was bound and determined to stick to the path I'd chosen. But he caught me on a bad day, or a good day, I guess, in hindsight. And I said, I'm not happy here. And I'd known him well enough at that point to be honest with him as a customer and sort of as a friend by that point. So long story short, went in that same day, interviewed, with him just to do didn't even know what I was getting into, knew nothing about the eye care world, knew that I should probably go to the eye doctor once every few years. And that was about it. Had no idea what an optical laboratory was other than, helping these guys with banking for the last so many years. Ended up going over there, working as the office manager to what was then a new lab after they'd gotten out of Optogenics, started US Optical up in Syracuse. And it was only about a year and a half old when I joined. Ended up helping kind of clean up and manage the office for a couple of years, working with the co-trans, and still planned on getting into financial advising, planned on moving to North Carolina to do it though. And I just ended up loving the optical world, fell in love with the lab process, the manufacturing process, really enjoyed what I was doing. And most of all, I really enjoyed working for three brothers who were independent, who ran a good company and treated people well. It was a good work environment and they were making good products. And it was a change for me because coming from where I was with the banking world, the direction of that bank at the time had taken a very pushy sales approach, a product-based approach rather than more of a holistic approach that I used to be able to do to help customers, whether it was consolidating debt, improving their finances, getting into good investments. Mm-hmm. So I found that this was a different world where I could do something similar to what I used to. We could help private practices with their private pay work, and they could be more profitable. They could deliver better service to their customers. So I stuck with it, ended up opening up the Mid-Atlantic sales territory for US Optical in 2011, worked for them for a number of years. Eventually they sold the company to Essilor, and I did not feel like sticking around to get back into another corporate situation like I'd been in it with banking. So ended up having an opportunity to get independent optical lab started. And for me, this was, and that's a whole story in and of itself, but the Cliff Notes version of that is that I tried finding other labs that I could work for after they sold to Essilor and I left. And I simply wanted to have another laboratory that could take care of my private practice customers and do good work for them. And I just had a hard time finding one. So through a number of situations, ended up having the opportunity to start one. And in the end, it ended up being the only way I could find to control the quality of the work that was supporting our private practices and to also have control over the end result of the company itself, creating a good work environment for our people long term.
Yeah. Financial planning to optical is definitely a major turn. But I think a lot of us can empathize with that experience. I know maybe the listener can empathize if they've started out their career or currently work in a corporate optometry setting and before heading over to a private practice setting. So I think they can probably feel that frustration. I know personally, I had that same frustration in the earliest years of my career. I couldn't wait to get into a private, independent financial planning firm setting. So I definitely can empathize with that. And what is it like? I mean, what goes into building an independent optical lab from scratch? I mean, it sounds like a super capital intensive endeavor. Like what goes into that? It's not like opening up a financial planning firm. I mean, what goes into that?
Yeah, sure. That's something I couldn't have answered 3 years ago when I was starting the process. I had no idea what went into starting an optical lab. It ended up being a lot that I had never experienced before, but it's been quite the process. It was about all in, it was about a $5.5 million project. And so I didn't have the money for that. I was out of a job at the time because I was looking for work from other labs and not getting it. And I'm the type that if I can't pitch my customers on something I don't believe in, I just won't try to get them to do it. So I'm not making any money. So ended up working with some professional investors, raising the capital and putting together a business plan. Had a lot of help, had some very experienced people to help with some of the logistical planning. But really at the end of the day, a lot of it was on me to figure out the setup, the structure. We had some engineering help, which was great to get the manufacturing process underway. But I'll tell you, when I came from doing sales in an optical lab after having worked at an optical lab, I thought I knew a lot about the manufacturing process, but then when you have to set it up from scratch, learn how much you didn't actually know. Yeah. And just getting it up and running was, as you said, capital intensive, selecting the equipment. It's funny, a lot of your customers will be able to relate to the limited number of choices of laboratories that they have out there from a corporate standpoint. Same thing applies in the manufacturing world, the equipment. There's only a couple companies to choose from, really, and some of them are owned by some of our friends at SOL Exotica. So it's been an interesting process, but the biggest hurdles have been getting the funds, because nobody wants to lend to a brand new startup company that costs $5.5 million when you don't have a wealthy person starting it. I didn't have the assets to start a company like this. So when I went for SBA lending, I was just turned down. Probably tried about 75 or 80 different banks around the country and just couldn't make it work. And spent a good long time already had the equity raised, but needed to get a little debt to go along with it. And that ended up being harder than getting the equity. Ended up happening in the long run, though. So, yeah. And then begins the whole phase of actually the physical setup, which was another beast of a project in and of itself.
Yeah. And that's interesting. You knew what you wanted. You felt a certain way about working independently and the quality of the product you wanted to manufacture. And you didn't see the opportunity out there to join another lab, so you went out and did it on your own. You started it yourself. So that's pretty interesting. And you've been working around eye care, you said, about 9 years now?
13 now.
13 years now. Okay. So you've seen a few things. And in your experience and in your conversations now with private practices, what are some of the challenges that you're seeing that private practices face to make sure that they are geared for the future, that they are able to keep their businesses sustainable, profitable, able to serve their community, and for their businesses to serve their personal life and fulfillment? So what are some of those biggest challenges that you're seeing?
Sure. So that's a good question. There's a lot of challenges out there for independent practices. And I think of independent optometry similarly to the old school independent pharmacist. If you drive up and down any major city these days, it's few and far between that you see an independent pharmacy. And when you do, it's almost a novelty these days. And from what I hear, they can do well for themselves, but it's pretty much all been gobbled up by corporate drugstores and so forth. And I feel that some of the challenges that independent optometry practices are facing are similar to probably what independent pharmacists saw some decades ago as that industry started to consolidate. We're seeing a lot of consolidation under corporate ownership, not just traditionally until the last 5 to 8 years, maybe. It was mostly consolidation in the options that your private practices had. So very few and fewer labs to choose from, fewer and fewer frame companies to choose from, more control, or if not control, influence by arm twisting to some degree by corporations and insurance companies in particular. And I think that probably the biggest challenge that independent optometry faces right now is staying independent. If people want to run their own practice, they need to be able to control their profitability. And more companies outside of the practice that are vendors of the practice and should be looked at as vendors are now becoming almost the decision makers on how much profit an independent practice is allowed to make. And I think that's probably, to sum it up, that's probably, in my view, the biggest challenge right now is how can an independent practice control their profit? Because if you can't control your profit, you don't have a sustainable business model.
So you're seeing less and less ability to, as you said, stay independent by making your own independent decisions around pricing and profitability and just choice in the business.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Just one brief example that I won't. We can go into more if it's appropriate, but in the insurance world, I recently saw an insurance chart from an unnamed major insurance company that many of your listeners have probably heard of in South Carolina that showed how much practice the profit was allowed to make on a sale. And if you sold this particular progressive lens in polycarbonate, you would make, say, $49 in profit. Now, if that patient was willing to pay the $50 upcharge to 167 to a higher index, more expensive material, you would be allowed to make $1 extra in profit.
I see.
So in a typical setting where you should be able to make an extra, I don't know, I'll just throw out 20% profit margin or potential, hopefully higher on an upgrade of a sale, you're only allowed to make $1 extra, and the insurance company gets to keep the remaining 99% essentially.
Yeah.
So that's just one small example of what a lot of private practices are seeing these days.
Yeah. I mean, that's interesting, especially when you're seeing, you hear a lot about inflation right now, right? Rising costs in different areas, and a lot of the conversations I'm seeing are talking about, okay, we can try to raise prices, but what's the point? Because these unnamed partners and their practices are sort of limiting the amount of profit they can actually get from those sales. So that sounds like a big challenge, and there's a lot of different parties involved. How do private practices solve that? What's the solution to then overcoming that? Because it's not something that can't be overcome. I don't think it's a business challenge. So how should private practices look at solving that challenge and staying more independent in their decisions and in their profitability?
Yeah, so that's the real question, and I won't pretend that I have the answer to that, or that there even is one answer to that, because the answer to any business challenge is often multifaceted, and you have to look at it from various angles. So to start with, I would think about the mindset of it. If an optometrist is in private practice and wants to remain in private practice, then the mindset of how that optometrist runs his or her business needs to be paramount. So the mindset has to do with what's going to be sustainable, and another company telling my business how much profit I am allowed to make, to me, cries, I'm servicing that company's customer. And that is one angle that needs to be looked at in the insurance world, is how can insurance be utilized for what it is, but also not be allowed to dominate my practice. And if that's not looked at, then you're going to end up, depending on your region, because insurance changes state to state, region to region, obviously. If that's not looked at, then it is going to be more difficult to remain independent, because you may find yourself in a position where you're 80% insurance based. And now all the keys to your profit are in another company's hands. But in order to address that, you really need to hit the mindset also of the patient. So that's one of the main takeaways that I've gotten from working with private practices in recent years, is the mindset of the patient sometimes can't be changed, but it can be influenced. You got to look at what levers you can control and what levers you can influence. And you can only control so much. You can't just, like some people will say, just, get rid of insurance, drop the major insurance. But that's not necessarily a practical solution, because by doing that, you may alienate a good percentage of your patients. But if you're able to work with your patients on the mindset of, well, what is insurance? Is insurance that you're looking at for vision care just a glorified prepaid discount plan? Are you actually getting the ultimate benefit out of it? Is there some way that we can arrange our practice and our price lists so that we can draw our ideal patient our way and make more profit while also giving equal value to, or hopefully better value to, the patient? So rambling answer to some degree, because there is no one answer. It really needs to be looked at from a holistic standpoint that goes well outside of insurance and into, as I said, mindset and plenty of other areas.
Yeah, and I think if you look around, you can find a lot of strong opinions about what the solutions should be. On one end, it's you need to dump every vision plan and you need to go fully cash pay only and be independent. On the other hand, it's just work within the sandbox as best as you can. But I think what you said is reasonable. It's about mindset. And when I look at the conversations out there, obviously this is totally out of my wheelbox again. I'm not an optometrist, I'm not a consultant, but just when I see the conversations and hear the conversations, the people that seem to be navigating through this the best, the practice owners, are those that have a mindset of opportunity. So they just see this as a curveball, as a business challenge, and they're just asking themselves and their peers, okay, what do I need to do to get around this? So that's number one, is a mindset of opportunity. And number two, it's intentionality. It's whatever direction or decision you need to go in your practice. What I'm seeing are those that are navigating this best and are remaining profitable and still have strong, healthy practices are just being intentional about whichever direction they're going with that, whether it's dropping vision plans, whether it's just working more profitably within the vision plans that they're working with, whatever that is, it's intentionality. I think it's sort of being stuck in that muddy middle where you're just feeling the pain but not really taking any intentional actions to address it. I think that's where practice owners get stuck and kind of feel like there's no way out. And anything to add there or touch on there, Ben?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. If you can be intentional and work within a business model that has insurance or that doesn't have insurance, you can find ways to make your practice work. I'm of the opinion that long term for the industry as a whole, the independent practice needs to be much less willing to give into insurance companies in a sense. But at the same time, a perfect example that I have here locally of exactly what you just talked about are two different optometry practices. One started a few years ago that went zero insurance, all cash pay. And it's been a slower road to get to where that practice is at now, which they're doing quite well. But it was a slower road. But then a different practice, 45 minutes down the road, started only maybe a year ago, is probably doing easily double the volume of the older practice. But they started with insurance, with all the insurances, just to get butts in the chair. The difference, though, was I think exactly what you mentioned, Evon, was intentionality. The older practice wanted to go that way, and that was the entire business model. The newer one actually didn't want to go the insurance route, but it was a married optometry team who were both trying to make it work with a brand new practice coming out from outside jobs, and they wanted to be able to get away from those W-2 positions and into full-time employment for themselves as quickly as possible. And it just made sense for them to do that because it gave them a huge boost. Now, for them, the challenge is going to be on the back end. How do I pivot my business to be profitable and to make sure that I have control over my business versus the initial optometrist, slightly older established business, but that was a front-end problem of how do I build this up on my own. I have to think outside the box earlier on or later on.
Yeah,
but in both cases, they were intentional about their efforts.
Yeah, interesting. I think back to a conversation I actually had on the podcast earlier on with Drs. Zilnicki and Lakowski. They cold started a vision therapy practice with almost no insurance and no optical at all. Wow. Right? So they navigated their own way around that. They looked around their sort of competitive environment and says, this is a niche, a target that we can fit in and do really well in. And that's just an example, and not that that's right for everybody, but that's just an example of what just having some intentionality can do in the way you build your practice. So that's a big challenge, and we talked a little bit about that. But what are some opportunities that you see in private practices? Is the future bright for private practices? What do you think?
I think it is because people always cry foul when some new thing comes into the industry. Not cataract surgery, but laser vision correction comes out, and everybody thinks it's the end of glasses. Contacts comes out years ago. Everybody thinks it's the end of glasses. Online companies start selling. Everybody thinks it's the end of brick and mortar stores. But I think there's a big opportunity with the upcoming, with generational growth. We have huge opportunity in the private practice world. And forget private practice for a second. Just in the brick and mortar establishments that are out there, there's huge opportunity as you have an aging population getting into progressive lenses at a time when online companies are boosting sales like crazy, but they're not quite able to make it work for that population that needs to get into progressive lenses. So you've got a lot of dissatisfaction with the online world, while at the same time it's able to meet certain needs. A lot of people are going there and seeing, oh, that's not really for me. They couldn't really make what I needed. And so people are realizing that the service level needed for professional eye care, and not just glasses, not just contacts, but actual eye care, vision care, the service and attention that's needed is an in-person experience. And I think there's a huge opportunity for private practices if they can differentiate themselves from corporate practices and give a higher level of service in terms of the patient care itself, the exam itself, the overall experience in the practice, as well as the timeliness and quality of getting the final product to the patient, I think the opportunity is huge. And obviously, I'm not coming up with some creative solution, because really vision care comes down to caring for people's vision. So if we
Yeah.
can do that as a private practice and do it well, I think the opportunities are huge right now.
And so you started an independent lab. How does it work to work and partner with an independent lab, and how is that different from working with one of the big labs that people are familiar with, the Zeiss or the Essilor, whatever it is? Like how is that different?
Sure. Yeah, great question. So I look at partnering with a corporate lab, we'll say, or an insurance lab, because let's face it, most of the corporate labs these days, if not all of them, they're largely insurance based, because insurance has captured so much of the market share. So I liken the difference to ordering your glasses online versus ordering your glasses from an in-person optometrist. You're going to get a different level of service. And so the same pitch, if you will, that a private practice or even a corporate practice, a brick and mortar, is going to use on the patient who comes in and says, why shouldn't I just buy these online? They're $50 or $100 cheaper. Well, the obvious answer that any competent eye care professional is going to give is, well, we're going to give you a higher level of service. We're going to take care of you. We're going to make sure that your glasses fit properly. We're going to give you better turnaround time and so forth. Similar answer when it comes to working with an independent lab. If you're working with an insurance lab on insurance work, they're getting bogged down and overwhelmed by the quantity of insurance jobs that they're pulling into their lab, especially with the consolidation of labs in recent years. You have drastically, exponentially less labs in the United States than we did 10, 15, 20 years ago. So the more these insurance companies take over, the more the corporate companies shut down their labs, outsource to Mexico, outsource to China, go to a very, very small footprint in the US of major mega labs, huge size, smaller quantities, the longer your work's going to take. So if this is what I would ask a private practitioner is, if I have a husband and a wife come in and the husband uses his insurance and the wife doesn't have eye care insurance, just wants to pay cash, why would I want to send the wife's glasses to the insurance lab when it's going to take probably 2 to 3 weeks to come back, when I can send it to a private pay lab, not just independent optical lab, can send it to a lab that focuses on cash pay patients and get it back in 3 to 5 days. So it's a higher level of service that we're allowing practitioners to give to their cash pay patients. And the way that I like to talk to our customers and potential customers about that at Independent Optical Lab is, take a look at who your patients are that actually bring the most amount of profit to your practice. They're going to be your cash pay patients every time. So why would you not give them a higher level of service? Because you want more of their business. You want them referring more people to you. And that's really what an independent private pay, especially lab, is going to do for a private practice.
Gotcha. And so I guess if a practice owner was evaluating which lab relationships they should work with, what are maybe those top criteria that they should be looking at? I mean, you mentioned some of them in what you just said, but what if you were to list out, like, here are the bullet points of factors you should consider, what would those top factors be?
Sure. Yeah. So the top 3 factors I would say are: 1, what's the quality like? 2, what's the turnaround time? And 3, what is the ownership like of the company? And the third one might seem like something a lot of practice owners wouldn't necessarily care about, because if I've got quality and service, check that box. If I've got good turnaround time, let's check that box. But what about the third one? What if I've got a lab that can do the first 2, but they're corporately owned? The truth is, a lot of corporate labs these days are owned by the private practice's direct competition. So do you really want to be feeding your competition?
Can you explain that a little bit more?
Sure. Yeah. So I just here in North Carolina alone, we have a major optometry group that is owned by a purchasing group that is owned by EssilorLuxottica. And so right there, you have right now, I have customers here in North Carolina, customers of Independent Optical Lab, that will order from a lab that owns the competition 2 doors down from them, that's actually active in private practice optometry now. But Of course, it's through a buying two layers removed in a buying group. Vision Monday was putting out something about this recently. So a lot of practice owners maybe wouldn't, I don't know, maybe somebody doesn't care about that. But to me, if I want my business to be sustainable in the long term, I'm going to make intentional decisions about who I buy from and make sure that the companies I'm giving my business money to, which is hard to come by, are companies that are supporting my business, not competing directly against it.
Yeah, that's a good point. What are some of the other benefits maybe that we haven't mentioned to work with an independent lab versus someone, especially someone that's potentially funding your own competition there? What are some other things to think about?
Sure. Really, the big thing that I would say is giving that higher level of service to your patients, because an independent lab that is focusing on private pay work in particular, they're going to have more attention to detail. They're going to get you less remakes. So a lot of practice profit and time is eaten up in unnecessary remakes coming from the lab.
Mm-hmm.
Just gets the job in, it's not quite right. We spend time checking it out, maybe putting it on the patient's face only to find out something's wrong. Now the patient needs to come back in. They might be a little frustrated. Office administration is spending more time putting remakes in. We just doubled the patient's turnaround time. An independent lab is going to give you that higher level of service that gets it right the first time much more regularly. And it also gives you more control. You have more product offerings. You have more control over the price levels at which you purchase. You also have more control over you honestly have more control over the service level, which sounds fanciful, but it's true. You call an independent lab and tell them what you need versus calling a lab doing 6,000 pairs a day. Call a lab doing 200 to 300 pairs a day and tell them what you need and find out what kind of difference you're going to get in responsiveness.
Yeah. I mean, that ties all back into what we were talking about earlier and the challenges of trying to keep independent, when a lot of the choices around you are starting to become less and less in your control.
Yeah.
What is the future of your side of the industry look like? What are some things that you're looking towards in the future in terms of whether it's optical technology, whether it's in manufacturing on your side? What are some of the things that you're seeing come up in the future of your line of work that practice owners should know about?
Sure. So the big thing that's coming up in the future on the lab world that is really here now, but it's private pay lenses, private label lenses, private label products. Lens technology has evolved so much in the last 15 years in particular that name brands are largely marketing opportunities. Paying for a $25 million annual budget just so your patient can come in the door and say a name brand because they've seen a commercial, when you may be able to lower your cost by as much as 40% or more sometimes and get at least as equal quality, typically better, to be honest with you, because now you have companies like IoT, who's owned by Younger Optics, a Spanish company, IoT. They make some of the best lens designs on the market. So all of Independent Optical Labs brand, Indie brand, which is our private label brand, they're all IoT designs, and they are constantly being updated. You no longer have an outdated model of pre-molded blanks that some of the major labs are very much dependent on this particular manufacturing process, to where they make a new design, they have 700 new SKUs that they're going to manufacture, they're going to sell it to their entire lab network, who now has to buy all those SKUs. Now you've got freeform technology, it's been around for quite some time now, that has better visual acuity, has more material options, it has better control over costs. We can go as far now as creating a private label brand and branding it to a practice. If you have a big practice who wants to have their own name of a lens, we can do that now. So really looking forward, if I was a private practice owner, I would be paying attention to individual labs, private label brands, dig in, ask questions. Are they using IoT designs? Are they using an updated design? Are they selling an old design that some company gave them that's 10 years old? Ask questions, find out, because you can control your costs and get your patients in oftentimes better products.
Interesting. So what are some, as we kind of wrap up here and get to the end of our conversation, what are some final thoughts that you'd want to leave with practice owners as they are navigating these challenges, navigating sort of an interesting economic time right now? What are some things you'd like to leave with them?
Sure. The biggest thing I would leave with private practice owners is that it is possible to run a profitable private practice. You have, especially to that practice owner who is 50% plus insurance based and constantly running ragged because you have such a high patient load, there is a more profitable way to run your business. There is a more profitable way to see less number of patients, deliver the quality care that you actually really want to be able to deliver, but at the same time, increase your profit margins. It just takes some counseling, some business counseling, some forethought. And it also takes a little bit of courage, because once you're wrapped into the insurance game, it's kind of hard to unwrap that. It's hard to go backwards, but it is possible. There's actually more and more practices doing that these days, whether it's completely or partially. That's up to each individual business owner, and also can be very largely dependent on your locale, because you have some companies that are going to be very heavily weighted in your area. But I'll tell you, there's a lot of good companies out there now that are like Optometry Advisors, advising people on how to take their private practices and make them as profitable as possible. The other last part I'll say about that is, if you're an optometrist and you want to have a career in private practice, then take a look at everybody that you're purchasing from and ask yourself, do their goals and missions align with mine as a private practice owner? Because there are enough companies out there that you can find to purchase from. And if their goals and missions align with yours, then you'll be able to do better in the long run.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. And you're right. There are a lot of resources out there, whether it's independent labs like yourself, whether it's consultants, or I think there's a company out there called Anagram that's helping shape patient conversations around out-of-network benefits. And hopefully I didn't misrepresent everything they do, but there's a lot of resources out there, whatever it may be. So whatever decision you want to make and direction you want to take your business, there are people there able to help. Absolutely. And again, as I have this conversation with you, like, I look at this from the financial success part of an optometrist's life and in managing finances. And a big part of that, if it's a practice owner, is going to be the success and profitability of the practice. Mm-hmm. And if you pull up a P&L in any private practice, the first expense that you're going to see, which is going to be one of the largest, if not the largest, is cost of goods sold. Yep. And lab expenses are a part of that. And so just looking at who you partner with and how those expenses and the quality of those goods and everything that goes into that and the patient experience, that's an important part of maintaining profitable businesses, maintaining profitable practices. So, Ben, I really appreciate you coming on. I loved everything you had to say today, and it was great for me to learn, and I think the listener can learn a lot too. Where can optometrists find you and follow you and learn more about what you're doing?
Sure. So our website is independent.vision. That's independent.vision, no .com. And can get in touch with us there, can see some videos of what we do. And we're out there. We are in North Carolina, but our slogan is that independent is the new local. So for any optometrist anywhere in the country, we do local service from North Carolina all over the place.
Yeah. Independent is the new local. I love that. And we will put all of your contact information and anything else we mentioned in today's show notes. For the listener, really appreciate your time today and listening in with us. Ben, again, thank you so much for coming on, and we will catch you all on the next episode. In the meantime, take care.
Thanks, Evon.
Want more resources to help master your money? Check out the Education Hub on Evon's website at optometrywealth.com. Evon Mendrin is a certified financial planner and owner of Optometry Wealth Advisors, a California registered investment advisor. All opinions of Evon and his guests are their own. This show is for informational purposes only and should not be relied on for specific investment, legal, tax, or other decisions. Clients of OWA may own securities mentioned on this show.